Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. We're here, we're back, we're ready to talk plants, or specifically quizzes, but we'll get to that. Anyways,
there will be no test today.
How close? This is random, but I'm seeing a bird outside the window right now, and it's reminding me about the fact that I think I've made sort of friends. I don't know if I've made friends. They might try to kill me. There's with some black-headed vultures. We have been in very close contact recently, and I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Is that like have lunch or something?
I mean, like
within a foot of the bathtub while she's like soaking in there.
It's
weird.
No, I think that if I'm ever like someone who has control of birds, it will be of like ravens or crows.
Is that like your superhero power that you've always dreamed of?
Like birds like that.
Carrion?
Yeah. I was sure you want to be, you are / whatever,
a falconer?
A falconer guy.
Yeah, but I think I ultimately would love to have a murder of crows.
Yeah, corvids, man. Corvids are crazy. There's a whole community side conversation happening between primatologists and I don't know what they're called, corvidologists, about which one is more intelligent, quote unquote. And like there's this book called "Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?" or something like that.
Yeah,
that I read. It's pretty cool. It's just about animal intelligence, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff about crows. And I was talking to Annie literally just yesterday. I was talking to Annie. I was like, so if crows are super intelligent and they're birds, it means that they are choosing as they fly over not to poop on us. Like, it's not random.
I think crows probably do to make that choice. Yes,
they're choosing not
to. Don't have anything to give at that second, but would otherwise do so.
Not everybody can spit out a dump on.
But I mean, I feel like if if they were like ready to go and they're like, oh, this is the
I'm gonna
dude
go find
who,
someone.
I'm gonna go in here and they
what
don't.
What if they're so smart that they're not letting us know that they're smart?
I don't know, man. They're giving it away.
I think they're like the aliens.
Give it away. Yeah, they are very super. And they use, what do they have habits of tool use and
they use tools. They have like a sense of fairness. Like when they do experiments where they give extras to one, they like distribute. I've heard like if you have peanuts, like I think they dig peanuts a lot, but like I've read countless like kind of anecdotal stories of like people feeding them and like they will recognize that like people chase like dollar bills and like money, and like if you feed them, they like bring you stuff that people like.
Yeah. There's a whole thing like uneasy. I'm so excited. I'm like throwing my hands right now.
This is why Alexis has been making friends with birds.
With a vulture, she's like throwing dead animals up to it.
Yeah.
It's this little crow box that you can make where it is essentially when they put something in the little box and like you can adjust the hole so like they only can put like quarters or something like that size in there.
ATM.
And so they'll drop anything that'll fit in there. And once they drop something in, it releases like a little bit of cat food. And so like they'll bring you things in exchange for the cat food or whatever it is that you put in there. But yeah, it's like this whole thing. And they recognize families. So like they'll recognize your children growing and know that you're like in the same household. And
we're the same unit.
There's this one, this person who studies them over in, I think it was in like San Francisco, and they had put those bird spikes, you know what I'm talking about? Where you
pigeon strips.
On this really tall building in the city. And, crows didn't like necessarily ever nest there. It really had nothing to do with them. It was probably for like the pigeons and stuff. Well, the crows found out about this injustice in their brain, and they went and tore all of them down for they didn't come back and nest. They just would go and threw them onto the street. It's funny because you can just imagine them like cussing and being like, these sons of, and just throwing these little things off. And then they would just leave and they're like, our work here is done.
Ray, you mentioned them using tools. I've actually seen them use a tool to pry a window open.
It
was this just entered into Stephen King territory.
It was a crowbar.
Oh my Lord. Nice. Or I was
Walked into that one.
I was going with a pub. It's the Crowbar.
Yeah. We thought it was Stephen King. It went Stephen Carell.
Oh, nice. Oh, how the plot twists and turns.
What did we just say earlier? We have to spread out the jokes further because people can't hear them over their laughter. So,
well, that's one of the complaints we've gotten when people leave reviews is like, sometimes your first joke is so funny that I'm still laughing so hard that I missed the second joke. And I was like, another person saying that. I get it a lot in real life. On the podcast. Sorry, everybody.
It's a natural flow.
So we're just going to pause for about 2 minutes after each joke. 2
minutes of dead air.
Just to make sure you can get it all
let
out.
it land, you know?
Like a Eckhart Tolle, like, dung. That might not be. You guys ever listen to that? The Power of Being or something?
Power of Now. Yeah.
Power of Now, yeah. I only read it, but apparently in the audiobook, he uses a lot of like gong chime kind of things.
Realign the energy. And
maybe that's where if we ever get sponsored, we'll drop commercials in after a joke so people can just laugh and not miss content.
Drink your Ovaltine.
Yes, just like that. Well, just remember, Lexus, you started this.
I did. I'm sorry. I know this is a plant podcast. I promise we're getting there. I hope you're not mad about the crow content. It was good content. I don't care what you think. It is. Anyways, speaking of tools, there are tools that we have talked about on here before that humans can use. Nice. One of them that the Center for Crop Diversification has is called the HortBiz Quiz. And I'm going to let the CCD ball boys talk to you a little bit more about that.
Maybe you could kind of introduce the quiz a little, because I've only been there as a consumer of the quiz's data. Brett was there at its birth.
Brett is the mother of the HortBiz Quiz.
Exactly. That's much, that's my Targaryen name.
To fame.
Mother of Biz Quiz.
Nice.
I hope to have a different arc from Dany in Game of Thrones, but
we're talking about the crows, so it's appropriate.
That's true. Yeah.
Nice.
King of the North.
Exactly.
So what does the Biz Quiz do? Give you good grades and make you feel good, or what's happening?
Well, it depends on whether you've been good or bad, Josh. No, the Biz Quiz was designed to address the question that we certainly receive, and I know that agents definitely hear quite a lot, which is, I just bought, or I'm thinking about buying 5-10 acres. What should I do now? I saw on a lifestyle blog that lavender is all the rage now, or I think I could probably do 5 acres of tomatoes and make this amount of money, etc. It was just a way that's a big question when someone comes in and says, what do I do with...
What should I grow?
What do I do with the next 20 years of my life?
Yeah, I have land. That's the only thing that goes into this, right? Or I have, And so it asks a series of questions. We were trying to be a little bit more interactive, a la a BuzzFeed quiz of sort of, but not as fun because we are a university fun. After all. There's serious business, this podcast notwithstanding. And so you ask a series of questions that determine what your availability is for your land, labor, and capital. And so generally speaking, it kind of classifies people into, for the enterprises, horticulture enterprises we're talking about, whether either a high level of capital, a medium level of capital, or little to no capital at all. Same thing for land, same thing for labor. And so the general idea is, if you have no labor, you should not consider tomatoes, like on a large scale. If you don't have much land, then you probably don't want to do butternut squash or watermelons or something like that that's really land intensive. So you answer the questions. It spits out on the back end. It looks like you have some capital, you don't have much land, and you don't have much labor. Or you have a little bit of capital, but you have a lot of land and not much labor or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it creates these typologies that then allows you to see where you fit within the conversation about what horticulture crops you might want to consider. And it gives you some things you might want to consider and some things you might want to avoid. Mm-hmm. You can then take that and have a conversation with your extension agent, or just take it forth and kind of look through some of the crop profiles that we have, thinking about other things. in a little bit more structured way than just, I have 10 acres and what do I do with it? It's like, okay, I have some access to some money, or I have this, whatever your relationship is to this other variables as well. And so I think it's helpful in a number of ways. One, it allows you to start to narrow down the crops that you may or may not want to consider. It allows you in sometimes those awkward conversations where an agent or somebody doesn't want to ask, so how much money you got? Right. Allows you to answer to a computer that then spits it back to you, and then you can contact them further down the line. And I think it for our side of it, it's been really helpful to see the people who are responding, to see kind of where they are in relation to those different variables. Because to be honest, the type of programming that we offer, even the podcast episodes or whatever that we do, or the educational classes that we put out, or the new publications we develop, are partially or in large part determined by need. And so the needs for someone who has plenty of money and just lacks labor are very different from someone who has some labor and some land but doesn't have much capital. And so understanding the cross sections of groups that we're talking to that are answering the Biz Quiz has been cool for us. And we've been able to pull some data, some like anonymized data out of these and explore them. And there will be a forthcoming extension publication that Josh has spearheaded, and some other stuff. We've explored it a little bit in our newsletters, but we thought we'd talk through some of that today. And I think more broadly, just trying to take a look at, we are in Kentucky. What does it mean? Or, I say we're in Kentucky. A lot of the people who answer the Biz Quiz are also in other regions. They're also international. But what does it look like to think so concretely about space-based enterprises like agriculture, things that have like these more material considerations like capital, things that are extremely labor intensive, which almost all horticultural enterprises can be. What does it look like to consider that and think about that, and what is the state of the HortBiz Quiz respondents? And we're going to do that, and I think with a little bit of context, maybe from some census information as well.
And just if you've been around, you have heard us talk about the Biz Quiz before. So we're just basically kind of giving an update, maybe a little bit deeper diver on the numbers and what we've learned since then. So you're not listening to the same episode again. And if you want more info on the Hort Biz Quiz, check out that previous episode from, I think it was December. But anyway, sorry, Josh.
I just wanted to also kind of start off by saying, this thing was open and available to a global audience, right? So we had some respondents that were, I think the farthest one away was somewhere in Afghanistan, took the HortBiz Quiz. That is very Kentucky branded, kind of impressed that it was found and taken by somebody that far away. But we were also able to kind of isolate geographically where people were, to kind of focus on Kentucky and regional responses. And just for some hard numbers, is in the 4 years that of responses that were analyzed globally, we had almost 1,000 responses for 942 responses to this quiz. And that 43% of them came from inside Kentucky. And a little over 60 came from either Kentucky or one of the states touching Kentucky. So nice. A lot of these, we definitely hit kind of our target audience, and we aren't being, even when we look at the global data, it's not being skewed too far by these people from well outside the region with potentially different concerns and different access to resources. But yeah, that, and so that puts us at, a lot of Kentucky responses, and we could focus on those. And we kind of also broke them down by years to see if there were any trends and stuff like that. But I would say one of the things that popped out to me as, I don't know if it's necessarily surprising, but the trend was really strong, is that among these different types of growers, based on their access to these different resources, is that it was a relative minority of people that reported not having access to land, or as we define that here, having access to less than an acre, and were interested in horticultural production. That was kind of, it's important to point out, we had to kind of say, if you have more than an acre of land, we counted that as a yes. You have access to enough land to engage in horticulture or horticultural enterprise commercially, and less than an acre was kind of a no. Similarly, the questions like those breaking points for capital. Let me pull this up here and make sure I'm not saying the wrong thing. Yeah, we considered you to have access to capital if you had at least $5,001 to invest in an enterprise. And then when labor came around, if you were the only one who would be working on the enterprise, that was considered you had little to no labor, because the question was framed as how much labor can you access besides yourself? So if you can bring somebody on with you, or you characterize that as a moderate amount of labor besides yourself, we said that counted as having access to labor. So considering those, it is a minority of people, of respondents, both within Kentucky and the region, who indicated that they didn't have access to the land to engage in horticulture. So I'd say, kind of one of the take-home messages I got from that is that a lot of people interested in horticultural production are not limited by their land access.
That's pretty interesting. It makes me wonder, there's probably different ways to analyze it, or maybe there's a lack of information to analyze it, but it just makes me wonder if people seek these tools out, having some land available, they seek tools out after they get an ideal, or do they have a blank ideal and then they start seeking something as basic as land? What's the driving factor for seeking, I guess? And so that's interesting, the way that data kind of fell there. To me, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I do think that there is that reflected there, Ray, that like I think the land acquisition for a lot of people is the most familiar part of the process, because it's like, I've bought a house before. It's not that different. Whereas some of the other things of like thinking about labor or thinking about committing capital to the venture is a little bit more in the managing a business mindset, which is something that's very different. And just to clarify, something Josh said, we sort of the in our data side, nerd side, we categorize people who have less than an acre as a no. We just call it no. Really what it means is you are relatively land limited.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you have less than $5,000 to commit to the enterprise, you are relatively capital limited. It's not to say we understand that there's a lot of horticulture enterprises that are less than an acre, and some of them are actually quite profitable if they're really intensive and can on a per acre basis can really make an impact. And so it's not, it's, and I know that's not what you were saying, Josh, but just to before that,
no, it's important because when we think about analyzing this, we draw these binaries that
yes or no
strict. Right. Yeah, if you have less than an acre, we're not saying you cannot do commercial horticulture. But you might find yourself looking at systems that have some constraints. And another one that was kind of interesting that stood out was, among those different questions, we also asked people, if they had a specific market in mind, how they would kind of rate their current knowledge of growing crops and things like that. And a lot of these were very evenly distributed. We had there are a little over 10% of respondents in Kentucky that took this quiz, even though the quiz is about what should I grow. They already had a specific market in mind for it. And that they, rated themselves as being at least more than a quarter of them responded themselves as having an advanced or even an expert knowledge of growing horticultural crops in taking the quiz. So they felt very confident in their abilities and where they might sell.
Interesting. That's not who I'm usually sending to the biz quiz. So it's interesting that there's that percentage taking it.
Yeah, self-rating your knowledge is always a tricky thing.
Yeah,
some people are like, I'm an expert in podcasting.
And it's hard to know, what's a 10 and what's a 1. It's hard to know where you fall on the spectrum. If you're just, one person, it's hard to rate yourself and place yourself on that scale.
Well, so what from your all's perspective, like what what do you all hear as, new people who are coming and interested in getting into stuff? What's been your experience? I know you all the Biz Quiz you've mentioned it's been helpful. That's not what I'm fishing for here. I'm more interested in like, what do you all perceive as kind of happening? Are there types of people? Are there moments where they typically come to you, moments where they
Retirements.
typically don't?
So sometimes it's a life events like a retirement that motivates it. Sometimes it's just a move into the area that
Yeah.
motivates it, or a little bit of disposable personal time to invest in something. Or sometimes, I guess it's all over the board, because sometimes it's someone that's, very knowledgeable in production and they're looking to diversify. But other times, in a lot of cases for me, folks that come in, like, they don't have a real good grasp on how much labor it takes for that acre of tomatoes. So we spend a lot of time establishing a baseline, I guess. More often than not, I'm trying to establish some kind of ground rules and baselines for, being realistic about certain things.
Which that would track with the data. Like we talked about these different types and their responses. The group of people who had land but were limited in labor and limited in capital, that was our largest type of response, at a little over a quarter of all responses.
They have an asset and they're wanting to explore what to do with that. And we see that a lot, that they're like, well, we've got the biggest hurdle out of the way. We have land. And I'm like, whoa.
In a certain logic, that is true, but there are other barriers.
Yeah. Especially if, and it's not a bad thing, but especially if there's no production background, which is a good and a bad thing. It's good because there's not any habits to unlearn. It's bad because you simply just don't have any background in a thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say I get predominantly like kind of two types of people, and I won't necessarily put like an age on them. I get a few people who are retirement for sure, like younger retirement, early retirement. But lately, and over the past few years, I've had a lot more people who are in their 30s and I would say 30s, maybe early 40s, and are from out of state predominantly. And so they buy a bunch of land and, usually from wherever they're coming from, land there is much more expensive. So maybe they sold a house, and then to buy land and a home here is a lot less expensive. So maybe one spouse doesn't have to work anymore, but they want to basically, homestead and make up that amount of money, from the farm. And so I've been getting a lot more people like that, and they come in and they have done some research. Like the first group I have is they've done some research, but what they've not often done is the research for Kentucky. So they know everything they want to grow, but then they come in, I'm like, actually, you're probably not going to be able to like commercially grow figs unless you're growing them in a tunnel, or, just using that as example. They don't always have they're not quite there, right? Not quite there yet. And so then once you take some of those and dash their dreams a little bit, they're kind of left with, well, what do I grow then? And then we go to the Biz Quiz for that. And then the other set of people are have really no production background whatsoever, but they have some money, they have some land, and they say, I brought this, what do I do now? What do I grow? What do I do? And so you're like, okay, well, what are you interested in? And a lot of those initial questions that I would ask them, I can now let the Biz Quiz ask them, and then be able to start with them from a further point, which is why I love it.
It's a good base. That's why I've enjoyed it so
much.
And
I think it like brings out, like, it's like Brett said, like, I'm not going to probably I would ask them, but, about how much money, but I don't know if they're like comfortable necessarily with telling me that. And I just think it's a really honest tool without like it having to come from a person, right? Like the computer can be honest with you and you just take that brutal honesty and it is what it is. But like when I say it, I have to say it in a way that's like not condescending and not dashing their hopes and dreams and, trying to get them to a point. So if I let the computer crush their dreams, then they can come to me and we can rebuild them together. And so it paints me in a better light too. So thanks for that.
Do you all feel like there's a group of people or like a set of needs in those different kind of typologies that you've experienced that you are in a better position to meet or serve or help, or that you tend to have more success with them versus others? Like, is it easier to teach somebody who doesn't have any production experience if they have money and land, or is it easier to deal with somebody who has a little bit of land and some production experience but doesn't have much money?
I don't know. I guess that's a tough one for me to nail down exactly. I've not thought about it in those terms, Brett. But I believe if I do, do a good job with finding out what they need from why are they coming to me, why are they wanting to do this, that reveals a lot of insight on what you're asking, Brett. If they say, well, it needs to make money within the first year, or we're just doing it as a family hobby for homesteading, or it's okay if it's, grapes and it takes 8 years for a payback. If I do a good job asking them that, I'll eventually get to that point to where then we can do some realistic assessments. But it's like, I don't know, it's like a different scenario for every case. So that's a tough one. I'll have to think about that.
I would say there's always an exception to a rule, just like anything in life. But for me, at least the people that I've worked with, the people who go on to be successful and however they define success, it doesn't, whether it's making money or homesteading, whatever, but the people who actually do it are usually the people that have, I feel like, a little less money involved, or at least less money to spend. Because when they do invest that money, they are invested, right? Like they have to do this. If they're going to buy 200 blackberry plants, they got to commit. Versus some of the people who have moved here and they're just like, I bought this land and I should do something with it. And like, not to pick on them necessarily, but if they've got a lot of money to throw at it, they're, I think, less likely to be successful over, 3 to 5 years, or do it at all. Because when it comes down to it, a lot of the time they realize how much labor is involved, and they might not even go into it. But I think if we look at a 3 to 5 years, I see the most success in the people who have a little less money to invest. I feel like that tracks.
Yeah, I mean that I can follow the logic of that. I think we have seen, as you all are mentioning, the lots of folks moving here. I would say I have met more than a few moved here from California, specifically.
We have several.
And one of the things we have here that they don't have there is water, which is good for growing crops.
It helps for sure.
We also have all the diseases.
Yeah,
totally.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have a lot of assets here. Yeah.
But I think in less expensive land, certain reconnection with some idea where you're in range of older mountains or forest or whatever, all of that has some cachet. I think, there has been some people who are more or less a fan of this phenomenon unfolding. And I think, something I was, just to provide a little bit of context, I took a look at some of the key findings, or whatever you would say, from the 2022 ag census, which, and with census data, it's always like 1 to 2 years after the name on the date on the report. But from between 2017 and 2022, the number of farms in Kentucky decreased by 6,500. And that constitutes around 500,000 acres being removed from farming. And there are some other things about kind of the our overall sales increased by roughly $1 billion, and that across that 5-year period, once you've adjusted for inflation. Tobacco continues to decline drastically. There's now fewer than 1,000 tobacco farms in Kentucky. And so I think, this is the broader context in which these things are developing, these things are happening. And so when I hear somebody say, oh, I bought 10 acres, or I bought 100 acres, or I bought 50 acres, or whatever, it makes me think a little bit about this. So we're sort of like, while we're losing things as this broad phenomenon, we do have people who are interested in maybe coming in and being the small landholder, farmer, producer, whatever, and how we can support them. In some cases, I think they don't actually want to do it. I think they like the idea of it and they don't necessarily want to do it. But there are, I think, some people who do want to do it and are intrigued by the possibilities, and it, to put a little bit more data on it. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about. So for Kentucky in 2022, the average, the mean farm size was 179 acres, but the median, so the actual kind of true midpoint that reflects
not
there
being pulled by
being,
the outliers,
is 64 acres.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
big difference.
that surprises me. I didn't realize it was that skewed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as we lose more and more small farms, we're going to maybe see the identity of Kentucky agriculture change. I don't know that we necessarily will, I think, but just to compare that to the letter before us, the mean farm size in Kansas is 804 acres, but the median is still 164 there. So I think that there is still this role for small farms, and I think that is part of the reason we're kind of investigating some of these HortBiz Quiz data, is because we want to know how to support that type of work and support people in doing that. And the reality is people come to this work in very different ways. So there's some people who are row croppers and or cattle for a long time, and they're looking to diversify. There's some people, many of our clientele kind of come out of, they haven't been doing this before and they want to start. So what does anything, as far as changes you all have seen, or any reactions to some of the stuff I was saying here?
Something that you bring up, well, like where people are coming from, it made me look at one of the first questions on the quiz, which is, are you currently growing horticultural crops? And the people who answered yes to that is almost half.
Hey everybody, sorry we had a little blip because, it is storm season in Kentucky. So we're going to jump back in with talking about Biz Quiz and the questions. So I believe, Josh, we were talking about the first question on the Biz Quiz.
Yeah, which, kind of from Brett talking about like things shifting in the landscape of these farms and their sizes. The first question on the quiz was, are you currently growing horticultural crops? Which I was kind of surprised to see that the people who answered yes to that was 46%. So almost half, right? It's split down the middle as people are already growing horticultural crops.
And do you think that means that they're selling those horticulture crops, or that they've just got a big garden or something like
right,
that?
or grow for family or something like that? I don't want to assume, but the second follow-up question to that is asking them if they want to grow horticultural crops as part of a business, right, to make money.
Yeah.
And 3/4 of them answered in the positive to that.
Okay, yeah. So odds are good that most of that 46% or whatever you said it was have some experience with selling a horticulture product of some kind.
Right.
Is what we're thinking.
Or at least, they're curious about what are their other options in terms of what other crops to grow or what else they could get into.
So I guess maybe my sort of last question on this is, you all said you have a pub that's about to come out with kind of results. What is there something glaring that you all have learned from the data from the Biz Quiz that you're seeing reflected in the census, or that is just something that CCD is going to focus on moving forward based on those results?
Ooh, I don't know if we're quite to the point of. I think there's some
actionable
conversation
items
to have, about how we might shift it. Because others like this publication is going to come out, or it will be out at the time this airs. So right away, it's a CCD fact sheet 28. The official fun title is Obstacles and Opportunities in Horticulture: 5 years of responses to the HortBiz Quiz, where you can kind of see the responses to all this and how it breaks down. But I think that it may very well have some influence on how we develop programming, and if we kind of target different types of audiences with the understanding that there are different types of audiences based on what they have access to, and how we approach kind of production guides and things like that might need to reflect that.
I think part of it could be, and this is something that we've chatted about before, part of it could be more intense focus on some of the basics of starting and operating a business. Because I think if I do still think land access is a challenge in a number of ways, but we do have a critical audience, at least, who has surmounted that obstacle and are in the maybe they need more capital, or maybe they need to figure out about hiring their first employees or something like that. I think there's opportunities. There's some people who are already doing stuff like that, but to provide some more on ramps and more clear pictures of what that next part looks like. So again, I said that buying the land is kind of a familiar process, and the rest of it's a little bit kind of, I don't know. And with horticulture being essentially a labor intensive process, both in production and in marketing, a lot of times, I think that those could be aspects of future programming that we expand even more, is supporting those business functions, business knowledge, et cetera, for those who are interested in making money. And something I will just point out, something I try to say as much as I can, is that we are an extension. We're here to help you do what you want to do. And so in some cases, people are wanting to make money, or they're wanting to make a lot of money. And in other cases, people don't have an interest in that. They're interested in growing food for themselves or their families, or they're interested in supporting their communities. And these are all really valid ways to enter and participate in this horticultural stuff. And so that's, again, where the what is it, the joy and whatever of horticulture.
I believe that's it exactly. The joy and whatever.
So yeah, I'll just say that. But I think that it's a really good question, Alexis, as far as actionable next steps, and something that we are intending to operationalize and put into practice.
I love that, the business of horticulture, right? So I think there's a lot to put out there and make accessible to the people who speak the plant language. So that's great to hear that's on everybody's mind. And then the data is reflecting that too, because it's there's the quantitative, but the quality side of that discussion. And it seems like those are meeting up and agreeing with each other. So cool. Well, anything else about this, we'll link that pub. And so if you're interested in, maybe some the downfalls or the positives, or just what could be an issue that maybe you haven't thought about, if you're looking into going into, commercial horticulture production or expanding what you're doing already, then you can check out that publication. And of course, always feel free to shoot us an email if you have questions, if you're looking for the Biz Quiz. We'll put a link in that as well. Go listen to that.
It's still open and functional. Like, you could still take it. We're looking back at 5 years, but it's still available. You can still do it.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can listen to that other episode if you want more info on that, and just kind of talking about how that works and how we've used it. You can feel free to do that. But it is a great tool, and I have taken it more than once because it's fun. So sorry to skew the results, Josh. But
that's okay.
It is fun to take, in my opinion. If you're into that, you're like, what could I grow? What does it tell me? So that's always exciting if you're a plant nerd. But do that. Follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can shoot us a message on there. You can find great information from other places we'll share on there as well. So hopefully it'll keep you informed and up to date about things happening around Kentucky. Leave us a review if you're so inclined. And yeah, I almost gave my radio sign off just then, but I'm going to remember I'm on my podcast and not on the radio. So I hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you'll join us next time. Have a great one.